Okay, so I'm going to try to do a little quick crash course on fractions. This is kind of fractions 101. Some of this may be material that was covered in third grade, but has been quite a long time since they've looked at, so I do want to make sure we've got these very basics down before we get into some of the more advanced fourth grade fraction concepts. First of all, we need to discuss what a fraction is, what looking at fractions actually means for us. We need to know the parts of a fraction, so there's some vocabulary involved. I'm going to try to do this by writing on the screen, which if you've watched any of these videos before, you know isn't my finest skill, but we're going to give it a shot. So a fraction up here on the screen we have right now is 1/3, and the fraction has two parts. We have the numerator. I'm not going to write the whole thing out. I'm just going to use the letter N for numerator for now. And we have the denominator. And what I tell the students is that the letter D for denominator is the same thing as D for down or down below. It's the number underneath. What they're called is not quite as important as what they mean. When we're talking about fractions, the numerator is the number of parts, and I tell the kids it's the number of parts that we're working with, the number of parts that we're talking about or that we're dealing with. In this case, out of 3 parts, we're really just talking about one of them. And the denominator is the total number of parts. So I'm going to not go any further than that until I explain that a little bit, because, as I said, this is kind of the very basic thing we absolutely have to understand to be able to move forward. So what this is saying is that if I have 3 of something, and I'm only looking at one equal part of that something, then I'm talking about 1/3 of it. If I have a box that is divided into 3 sections, equal sections, and that's an important part of this, 3 equal sections, reasonably equal, I suppose. What I'm talking about is one of those thirds, one out of the 3 pieces. I'm only talking about 1 out of 3. And I tell kids that they can sort of interpret this symbol as meaning, or as representing out of, 1 out of 3. So 1 out of 3 sections of this box is shaded red. The other way we can think about fractions is as parts of a group. So if I have 1, 2, 3 circles, and I want to talk about 1/3 of them being shaded black, now I have 1 out of 3 black circles. That's really the basics of understanding how we use fractions, or what we're talking about when we're dealing with fractions. We're talking about the numerator. That's the number of parts that we're talking about. And we're talking about the denominator. That's the total number of parts that make up a whole. So the other part of this concept is if 3 is the total number of parts that make up a whole, then in this case, if this whole thing was shaded in, we call this 3/3 because 3 out of 3 pieces are shaded. 3 out of 3, that equals 1 whole box. We're talking about the whole thing. If I want to just talk about parts of it, then I'm talking about the numerator. I'm talking about how many parts. I'm going to leave that there for now. Feel free to put in the comments any questions you might have. I'll try to do a series of short videos like this just to go over the basics, make sure that students understand what we're doing, make sure that you can help your students, and that we're all using the same language when talking about fractions. As always, let me know if you have any questions or if there's anything I can do to help.